Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Sammy Marks Square in central Pretoria is one of the best-known landmarks in South Africa's capital city. But how many people know who Sammy Marks was? The 20th of February 2020 marked the 100th anniversary of the passing of this iconic Jewish immigrant to South Africa. Marks made a great impact on South Africa's industrial, political and social landscapes, and was a great contributor to both the Jewish community and South Africa as a whole.
Sammy Marks was born in a small town in the Russian Empire, a small town in Lithuania called Neustadt. He was born in 1844, and at a very early age, 18, he leaves the Tsarist Empire, leaves Lithuania, and he sails for England, and he makes his way to Sheffield in England, which at that stage is the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and he spends a while in Sheffield before moving off to South Africa at the age of 24. He arrives in South Africa in 1868. But he's joined by a cousin called Isaac Lewis, and at first they make a living by becoming peddlers. They peddle in the Western Cape, they accumulate some capital. What is crucial for both of them is the discovery of what is to become the great diamond discoveries at Kimberley. And what they do, these two young men, is they load up a wagon with goods and they set off for the north. So when they get to Kimberley, they discover that there's much more money to be made in diamonds than there is in selling goods. And Sammy Marks' first fortune, which he makes during the 1870s, is in diamonds. Now, one of the big problems about the Kimberley diamond fields is that there's insufficient fuel. You need fuel to run the steam engines for the mines. And he hears about the discovery of coal on the banks of the Vaal River, near today what is Vereeniging. He goes up there and he acquires these coal fields. On the same trip, he goes to Pretoria and he meets with Paul Kruger, who's to become a critical figure in the rest of his career. They have this sort of meeting, they get on very well, and Sammy Marks indicates his interest in the Transvaal, and Paul Kruger indicates that he's willing to support Marks in his business adventures in the Transvaal. Sammy Marks's career in the 1880s is that of a pioneering industrialist. He owns a coal mine, but at the same time he begins to invest in industry in the Transvaal. And he is the founder of literally of the first factory, what is called Eerste Fabriek, and the first factory in the Transvaal. And it's at a place called Hatherley, which is close by Pretoria, and it is a liquor distillery. 1886, a very important year in South African economic history, because that's when gold is discovered on the Witwatersrand. Sammy Marks is very excited about this. He contacts his partner, who's no longer in South Africa. His partner is now overseas. Writes to his partner, and he says to his partner, we should buy these properties because they're going to be very valuable. His partner, though, is a much more conservative individual than he is, his cousin Isaac Lewis. He says, we're overextended at the moment, let's not do this. And Sammy Marks says in his letter, we're going to regret this. And boy, does he regret it, because the effect of this is that when the gold mining industry gets going, Sammy Marks doesn't have a major stake in what is to become the greatest economic enterprise in South Africa, the gold mines of the Transvaal. Now, Sammy Marks's business career depends very much on his connection with the Transvaal government. Transvaal government supports his various business enterprises, which include a glass factory, a jam factory, the liquor distillery. So he does develop a very intimate and close relationship with Paul Kruger. Sammy Marks visits Paul Kruger at his house, which is still in Church Street in Pretoria today. They sit on the stoep and they talk about all sorts of things. They become very close and intimate friends. But at the same time, Sammy Marks does various favors for Paul Kruger. He helps Paul Kruger to become a wealthy man through a sale of a farm that Sammy Marks helps to arrange. He organizes loans for the South African Republic. He makes sure that Paul Kruger gets a very nice birthday present on all of his birthdays. He provides cows for Mrs. Kruger, Getsina Kruger, when hers don't produce. And as one of his most famous gestures of friendship is paying for the Paul Kruger statue, which is still in Church Square, Pretoria today. Sammy Marks is now established in the Transvaal in the early 1880s, and in 1884 he goes back to England. We had spent part of his young adulthood, and he comes back with a bride, and the bride is 18 years younger than him. She's 22, and her name is Bertha Goodman. And he brings her out to South Africa, and once they're in the Transvaal, back in Pretoria, he sets about building a house. He acquires a place called Zwartkoppies, which is east of Pretoria, and the house is really an English country house. That's the best way to describe it. And it's a house with all modern convenience, a wonderful house.
Sammy Marks came to South Africa as a Lithuanian immigrant with very little in 1869. By 1884, he had established himself in business and had made influential friends like Paul Kruger. He had also married Bertha Goodman, who he brought out from England. They settled on the farm Zwartkoppies.
Bertha Marks was not terribly sociable, unlike her husband, and her pleasures are her garden. She's a great gardener. She imports roses from Europe. She also gets very involved in rearing chickens. She also spends a lot of time on trips back to Europe. When she's in Europe, she is a shopaholic. She buys very extensively and brings these out to South Africa. And in one of the many letters between husband and wife, he complains about her shopping habits. He says, "What are you planning to do with all these things that you're sending out to South Africa? Are you planning to open a shop at Zwartkoppies?" So he complains about her spending habits. She also has a very large domestic staff at Zwartkoppies. These are effectively English gentry. They're leading an English gentry lifestyle. So they have many servants working for them, black and white. White servants who brought out from Europe.
She had this butler and she had these Irish maids. She was famous for the Irish maids because in those days it was that potato famine. And she had an average of about 13 Irish maids, sometimes less, sometimes more, because they were pretty girls and they were quickly snatched up by the local farmers. And the butler, Mr. McCracken. So you can imagine, the South Africans, the boere were very, very formal. And one thing that I'm always very amused about is if the boere came knocking on the door and this very formal English butler opened the door to them, I always wondered what their reaction was.
The great social day for Sammy Marks is Sunday, and his lunches on Sunday are famous. People will come in from Pretoria, they'll sit around the table, they'll have a lavish meal, and after the meal, Sammy Marks will take everybody on a walk around his estate, of which he's enormously proud. And so everybody and anybody who came to Pretoria, anybody who was famous and notable who came to visit Pretoria in those years would come out on a Sunday to enjoy Sammy Marks' hospitality at Zwartkoppies.
This was the highlight of your social life if you were ever invited to a dinner to this beautiful dining room. And the butler came and showed you your seat. This is at your name card and the menu on it. And you came through that door, the butler pulled out your chair and you sat down, all done in style. And look at these knives and forks. And just look at the size of these forks, but all was done very daintily. And that very practical meat dish. It's got these grooves and then it's tilted a little so that all the fat and sauce can run off.
Sammy Marks was not a religious Jew. He was rather a Jew of his time. He was a South African Jew of his time, somebody who was very proud of his Jewishness, very proud of his Jewish ethnicity. He never denied his Jewishness, unlike some of his colleagues in the mining industry who hoped to distance themselves from things Jewish. So he was very proud of being Jewish, but he was hardly religious. And the reason for that is that he, for much of his life, he lived beyond the frontiers of Jewishness. When he left the Cape and he went off to Kimberley, he was there before the establishment of the Kimberley Hebrew congregation, and certainly when he moved to the Transvaal, he was again beyond the frontiers of South African Jewry. So he lived a life away from Jews. Specifically, the home at Zwartkoppies, it was not kosher in any way. I've seen the letters, which include orders for lobsters and other forms of treif, and Sammy Marks clearly enjoyed these because he writes letters about how tasty these were. They certainly, and neither is he Sabbath observant. He works on Saturdays. The family doesn't have anything special on Friday nights. Instead, the big meal of the day is Sunday lunch for the family. The family also, like a lot of acculturated Anglo-Jewish families at the time, celebrated Christmas. The holidays that were important to him were Pesach, Passover, and Rosh Hashanah, but he didn't go to shul in Pretoria. He preferred to stay home on the high holidays.
He slept in the separate bedroom.
Certain times of the month.
Yeah, for the certain times of the month. This is a Jewish tradition. When the women menstruated, they were impure, and they weren't, according to the Bible, they weren't allowed to sleep with their husband, so that they can heal and their body can prepare itself for another pregnancy.
Yeah, he's very involved though with the Jewish community. He's a member both of the Cape Town Hebrew congregation, even though he doesn't live in Cape Town for very long, and he's also, crucially, a key member of the Pretoria Hebrew congregation, because he's the benefactor of the Pretoria Hebrew congregation. He provides the building materials for the synagogue. He also puts up there's a Jewish school established in Pretoria, which is named after his mother Miriam. It's the Miriam Marks School. So he's a very important benefactor, a donor towards Jewish causes. So he's a very generous man. So he's very generous towards Jewish causes, and he's very, very generous towards non-Jewish causes as well. That's one of his hallmarks, is his generosity and his philanthropy.
This beautiful bedroom and this beautiful...
Sammy Marks had a whole range of kids, and what's interesting about them is their education. It's very important for Marks that his kids have the best education, so they have a governess at home, but the boys in particular are sent to school, not in South Africa, they're sent abroad to private schools in England, and the girls follow suit. It's very important for somebody of his social class that his kids get the best possible education, and his view at least was that wasn't available at the time in South Africa.
And tradition had it in those days. That's why these rooms look small in comparison to the rest of the house. For the children, it's very fun if you say you're not allowed to play in your bedrooms and you're not allowed to sit on the bed.
One of Sammy Marks's great concerns was that his kids should remain within the Jewish faith. And the reason for that was that he had a daughter who he sent to an Anglican school in England to get her education. And she writes back to him in about 1904, saying to him that she would like to be baptized as a Christian. This is, as you can imagine, for somebody who is proudly Jewish, like Sammy Marks, this is a bombshell. He brings her back to South Africa immediately. She remains at home for quite a while. They skirt around this question of her desire for baptism, and there's a wonderful letter that she writes to him. It's a cri de coeur, it's a heart cry, in which she says to him, you've always emphasized that you're Jewish, but I don't know what your Jewishness actually means. What is your Jewishness about? She never converted to Christianity.
He was very proud of his Jewish heritage, and he kept up the Jewish customs. He had his sons circumcised, but he never forced a pre-arranged marriage on them. She never got married. She honored his father's wishes, not out of lack of boyfriends, just because she was Jewish. She's the only one buried on this farm.
Jewish immigrant to South Africa, Sammy Marks was a businessman, philanthropist and family man. But he also turned out to be a peacemaker and reluctant politician.
Throughout the war, quite uniquely, he remains on his farm. He remains on Zwartkoppies, despite the fact that Zwartkoppies is in the middle of a war zone. And the most important date for Sammy Marks during the war is in the middle of 1900, when the British arrive in Pretoria. And it's on that day that he switches from the Boer side to the British side, which is what many people did at the time. It seemed to be the sensible thing. And critically, in 1902, when the Boer commandos come into Vereeniging, which is his property, to make peace and to discuss peace with the British, it's on his property, and he provides electricity, he provides all sorts of services, and he goes to Vereeniging, and he meets with his old friends, who include the key Boer generals, General Smuts, General De La Rey, and he urges them and encourages them to make peace with the British. So he plays a part, not a big part, but a small part, in bringing about the peace in 1902. And in the wake of the war, so many Boers are destitute, so many people need help, and Sammy Marks goes out of his way to be helpful to people, including to his old friends like General De La Rey, to help them out financially. He's not deeply involved in politics after the war. He's friendly with General Botha, who becomes the key figure in Transvaal politics in the post-war period. And in 1910, when South Africa becomes a union, he is appointed to the Senate of South Africa. He becomes a union senator, and that's recognition of his services to South Africa. Sammy Marks' reputation as a great business success reaches back to Lithuania. There's this place in Africa where it's possible for people to go without means and to become wealthy. And crucially, he also maintains his ties with Lithuania. His father, Mordechai Marks, lives in the town of Neustadt, where he had always lived. Sammy Marks keeps up his ties with his father, and he regularly sends money back to Lithuania. And his father becomes quite a prominent gentleman in the town, in the shtetl in which Sammy Marks grew up, because he's now the conduit for all of this generosity coming from Africa. So he's proud of this connection, he maintains this connection. And certainly it's argued that one of the reasons why 40,000 South African Jews came from Lithuania and Eastern Europe in the 1880s through to the 1914, to the First World War, one of the reasons for that migration, but just one of the reasons, there are lots of reasons, was the reputation that had reached Lithuania of Sammy Marks's success there.
I am the wife of David, and David is the fourth generation in the Marks family. I feel honored to be part of this family. I think they're quite extraordinary, and I think Sammy would be very, very proud of every single one of them. The fifth generation, they are incredible. Classical pianists, neurosurgeons, anaesthetists, budding doctors, a mechanical engineer, an actress. We have an actress. They all are incredible, and they're very, very special people. I used to come visit the farm many times during that period. Joe, who was Sammy Marks's son, lived on the farm, and he managed things. And James was butler. He assisted Joe in every way on the farm, and he was very, very close to the family. Unfortunately, he had lost his legs, I think maybe to diabetes at this stage. And in fact, his daughter actually is part of the museum now.
Joe Marks built the school from all of us here at the farm. And now, but the farm now, there's plenty people who is going at this school. He was very kind of us because always when we go to the trip, he give us some money, those who got no money to go to the school.
And I feel proud as someone Jewish that Sammy Marks actually is part of the South African history.
Sammy Marks died 100 years ago, in fact, this year, 100 years ago. And Sammy Marks is a pioneer of industry in South Africa. He's a pioneer of coal mining in South Africa, and he's a pioneer of the steel industry. So for the last 10 years of his life, all of this is recognized. He sits in the Senate in Cape Town, and he remains a senator until his death in 1920. But I think the lessons of Sammy Marks' life are about entrepreneurship. That is the principal lesson. And it's about the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that not only Sammy Marks, but other Jewish entrepreneurs brought to South Africa in the late 19th century and right through the 20th century. What is so marked about Sammy Marks is his ability to imagine the unimaginable. In his case, for example, to imagine a steelworks on the veldt in South Africa. And this is what he does. He brings, as others do later on, vision, imagination, and a kind of entrepreneurial courage. That's the lesson of Sammy Marks.